Hello, my name is Michael Moran, and today I'd like to share with you the basics of how to play chess. Now, I fell in love with the game as a child when I found one of my father's chess sets. At the time, I was far more interested in playing with the little figurines than I was with actually learning the game, but as I got older, I began to appreciate the nuances and the strategy involved, and began to love the game. And I'd like to share with you some of what I've learned, so that you can begin to enjoy it as well. First off, the goal of the game is to get your opponent into checkmate. Now that's done in two parts. First, check is declared when the opponent's king is in a position to be captured. Now, checkmate happens when the king is unable to escape that position. The king might escape from check by either moving out of danger, by placing one of his own pieces between himself and whichever opponent's piece is placing him into check, or by capturing the opponent's piece that is placing him into check. Next, we're going to talk about setting up the board. This is how you want to orient the board. You'll want to notice that you want a light-colored square in the first row closest to the player on the right. And then after that, you'll want to set up your rooks. The rooks are the castle-like pieces. You'll want to put one of those on each of the far outside corners of the first row. Next, you will set up your knights. Your knights go just inside of the rooks on the two squares there. They'll be the horse head-shaped pieces, or look like a knight on a horse. After that come the bishops, just inside of there, one on a black square, one on a white. So they'll be on the third square from the outside. And just after that will be the queen. Now the queen goes on one of the two remaining squares. She'll be placed on the square that matches her own color. And then in the remaining piece goes the king. Just in front of them, on the second row, you'll place a row of 8 pawns. And they go just straight across. Then here we have a picture of the board set up entirely. Next, probably the most important part, is how to move the individual pieces. Basic rules of movement. The player with the white pieces always moves first. A lot of times this involves a coin toss or some sort of game of chance to decide who gets that advantage of moving first. And only one piece is moved during each turn. However, there is one exception to that. Castling, we'll discuss that later. The next, with the exception of the knight, no piece may move through another. Basically, that means when you run into another piece, your turn ends. If you run into one of your own pieces, you can't occupy that same square as your own piece, so you would stop next to it, depending on the piece. Or if you were to, you can capture your opponent's pieces by moving one of your pieces onto a square that they occupy. Now, first up, we'll talk about rook movement. Rook can move in 4 directions, either forwards, backwards, left, or right, like so. And he can stop on any square. He can move any number of squares forward, backwards, left, or right. And the knight moves in an L-shaped pattern. He moves 2 spaces and then 1 space at a 90-degree to those. So he can move 2 spaces to his right and up 1, 2 spaces to the right and down 1, 2 spaces down and right, 2 spaces down and left, 2 spaces left and down, left and up, and so forth. Basically, in an L shape, whatever pattern. The knight's also the only piece that can jump over another piece. If there were pieces in these spots, in these 2 spots, he can move through them. There would not be a problem. Next, we're talking about the bishops. Bishops can move any number of spaces in a diagonal. So they can go diagonally up, diagonally to the left, diagonally down, diagonally to the right. On the diagonals, incidentally, you'll have 1 bishop on a black square, 1 on a white, and they will always be on white or black squares. They cannot move one off the other. Makes them good to use in pairs. The queen is the most powerful piece on the board. She can move in any direction and any number of spots. So she can move down, up, left, right, diagonals, any number of spots. It does not matter. Makes her a very powerful piece. And like the queen, the king can move any direction that he likes. However, he can only move one square. So he can move diagonally one, down one, left or right one, but only one square. The pawn is a little bit different. On its first move, it can move 2 spaces up. Pawn always moves in a forward direction. It can move 1 or 2 spaces up. Now, after that first move, it can only move 1 space forward at a time. And when it captures another piece, it has to move at a diagonal. So here we have another pawn. The pawn here, instead of moving 1 space forward to the next black square, actually moves diagonals onto another white square. And can actually move either direction. There are a few special rules. First off, we have promotion. Basically, it's pretty simple. When a pawn makes it from its starting position all the way to the farthest row, so the first row for the other opponent, that pawn can be promoted. Basically, it can become any other piece on the board. Most often that means the pawn's going to be converted into a queen. Now, only pawns can be promoted. Any other piece makes it back there, it does not matter. And then also, there is I'll call it a rumor, widely held belief that a pawn can only be converted into a piece that's already been captured. This is not true. So what that means is you could, in theory, make all 8 of your pawns to that far row and have 9 queens on the board at any time. It won't ever happen, but try. Next up we have the en passant. It's French, it means in passing. What this essentially means is that on your first move with the pawn, you can move forward 2 spaces. Now, if that happens to take you adjacent to another pawn, like we have here, the opponent's pawn can actually capture this one, even though it wouldn't be moving at a diagonal to get it. It's next to it. It has to, on the next move at a diagonal behind the original pawn. So we have it moving to here. And that allows it to capture the pawn. Next up, we have castling. Castling is very important in strategy. What that allows you to do is actually move 2 pieces in one turn. In order for castling to work, your king cannot be in a check position. You cannot have moved either the king or a rook. You only need 1 rook to do it. You can only do it with one rook. So I have scenarios here for both. And then what you do is, when you castle, there also can't be any pieces in these spots here between the king and the rook. So if you're castling with this side, you wouldn't have any kings or pieces here or pieces here. So what you do is you would move your king 2 spaces towards the rook. And then place the rook on the opposite side of the king. So that means that your king's going to be actually slightly closer to the corner if you castle here to the right in this situation, or 1 spot away from that if you castle to the left. Either way, the rook ends up just on the inside of the king. And then finally we have some basic strategy. First off, protect your king. The game is over when your king is placed in the checkmate. Therefore, it is best to protect him. Great strategy for that would be to get your king to a corner. That makes him less vulnerable. You have fewer squares to protect against. So you get your king into a corner and that can help you out. Another strategy is don't give your pieces away. Each piece is valuable. Some are more valuable than others. Obviously, you don't want to give away your king, put him in danger. But right after that, your queen's very valuable, followed by your bishops. Your bishops and rooks, knights, pawns would be the least valuable, but they can also be very, very useful. So you don't want to give your pieces away. Have a strategy in mind if you're going to be trading pieces. Another thing you want to do is control the center of the board. When you have the center of the board, you have more options. It also means that your opponent has fewer options. So if you can control that center area, that's going to give you an advantage. And finally, use all your pieces. I know when I first started out, I liked the knights. I loved to play with the knights, so I was very dependent upon the knights. That was poor strategy. You want to involve all your pieces. Each has its own strengths and weaknesses. Each is going to give you certain advantages and give you opportunities that another might not. So you want to make sure you're getting all of your pieces involved. And then, of course, finally, practice. Practice always makes perfect, so the more you play, the better player you're going to be. Good luck's my last bit. Chess is a fun game. It's something that might seem complicated, but really the basic rules are pretty simple. And it is one of those lifetime games. You're going to be able to play this throughout your entire life. It stood the test of time. It will continue to stand the test of time. And will always be something that you can enjoy with friends and family. So, thank you for listening. I appreciate your time.